You don't want to be that guy that goes out and he's planted his wheat, he's got it formed, he gets some rain, and that wheat pops up, and we see them come in all the time, and we see them come sit down at the barn and try to buy their wheat cattle, and it's a whole lot cheaper to go out there and find the guy that does that on a daily basis to buy those cattle for you. So go find somebody you trust, somebody that you know that does a really good job of doing that, and does it every day on a daily basis, sets through them sale barns or sets through a video sale or whatever he may do, but he does it. That's his job. It's a whole lot cheaper to hire a professional than it is to try to go do some of that yourself if you're not used to doing that.
Welcome to We Live It, the Live Ag Podcast, your source for livestock market insights, management strategies, and real conversations with those who don't just work in the cattle industry, they live it. Here are your hosts, Ty D. Cordova and Casey Mabry.
Welcome back to We Live It, the Live Ag Podcast with Casey Mabry and myself, Ty D. Cordova. Once again, we have John Sloan on again. This is a part 2 of a series we decided to do with John. The last week, we talked about market strategies, the volatility of the market, the banking aspect of all of it. This week, we're going to dive into what we call a strategy or planning. And John, we've talked through some of this stuff, and Casey, we visited about it, just the strategy of the different types of operations, whether it's a wheat grass guy or a feed yard guy that's going to finish fed cattle. So, Casey, you want to kind of talk on that a little bit, kind of lead into what John's going to get to?
Yeah, I think we're going to kind of break this into 2 parts. And so we're going to do a little bit of role-playing type stuff. And so, John, like I was telling you before is, how do we get to a plan? And so I think you had some great insight on that, and I think it's going to be very educational in my mind. So, we're going to jump right into it. So let's play a little bit of scenario, and let's say I'm a guy that's been feeding some cattle or running some cattle on grass. Let's talk about grass first. I've been running some cattle on grass. Maybe I had 200 or 300 head of cattle, but now I'm starting to get bigger. Now I'm running 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 head of cattle. My banking's become more complex. My scope has become more complex. I made a little bit of money on 200 or 300 head of cattle, really good margins on a dollars per head standpoint, and I wanted to grow. It's kind of like whenever one scoop of ice cream is good, let's go after about 5 or 6 of them. So I think it's really important to go through some of the things that you talk about to make sure that we don't stub our toe or make mistakes. And so, again, let's talk about the grass guy, the wheat pasture guy, the guy that's going to buy lightweight cattle and sell an 8-weight.
Perfect. So that's a great subject, and that's something that we see every day. And the way I like to think of it is, let's talk not necessarily about the guy that's very established, been doing this a long time, has got a whole team built, and maybe he's a bigger operator. What I'd like to focus on is the person who maybe they're 35 years old, they're trying to grow their business, and they're thinking through all the things you just said, Casey. So the way whether it's a cattle feeding business or whether it's an advertising agency, you have to have a plan to run a business. You have to have a strategy. And the way I think of it is I like to break it down into steps. So in the cattle business, the first step is cattle procurement. So if a person came in and said, I want to be in cattle feeding, I'm looking to buy some cattle coming off pasture to put in the feed yard, the first question I'm going to ask them is, well, how are you going to buy these cattle? Who's going to help you? Are you experienced at that? How are you going to procure them so that you can give yourself the most advantages? Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And growing up in that industry where my dad, my grandpa, and them had an order buying company, and we bought cattle out of the sale barn since we were, I don't know, me and my brother probably started going to sales when we were 17 or 18 and order buying for my dad's order buying company. That's a real thing to concentrate on. You don't want to be that guy that goes out and he's planted his wheat, he's got it formed, he gets some rain, and that wheat pops up, and we see them come in all the time, and we see them come sit down at the barn and try to buy their wheat cattle, and it's a whole lot cheaper to go out there and find the guy that does that on a daily basis to buy those cattle for you. So go find somebody you trust, somebody that you know that does a really good job of doing that, and does it every day on a daily basis, sets through them sale barns or sets through a video sale or whatever he may do, but he does it. That's his job. It's a whole lot cheaper to hire a professional than it is to try to go do some of that yourself if you're not used to doing that. Because first thing you're going to do is get at that sale barn, and you got to create you a seat. Well, them guys that come over there every week, they ain't going to let you have that seat. So it's a whole lot better on you if you'll find somebody that you trust to procure those cattle for you, because they can get it done. Not saying they can do a better job than you, but they can do a better job than you. So that would be my advice.
So you think they can do a better job than you?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can only imagine. I mean, you think there's always those guys that we all think that he can save 50 cents or $1.00. And he goes and sits in the sale barn in his local area, and he's thinking about his scope. You know, in that scope, the sale barn might be high that day just for there. But even though they see that new and that fresh blood come in there, and they just hammer down on him. So, yeah, I think back to one story where I was, and I was just started out with Cargill, and the World Poker Tour was going on. And I slipped into Golden, Colorado, and went in one of those poker rooms. And I thought I was going to take them old men's money. And
how'd that work?
Yeah, it's about like going in there and trying to buy calves in the sale barn, I'm guessing.
I remember going to barn for the first time, and they always talked about this certain barn, how the cattle. I mean, the guys there, they were tough. I mean, it was rugged, and you get there and you try to get in there and start buying cattle, and my goodness, my dad would chew me. I mean, how are you buying? How are they $10 higher than mine? Well, you've been doing it for 40 years,
yeah, they respect
and I
you.
haven't. So now they're just taking dead aim at you, and that's just like anybody, just fresh blood in the water. You just kind of attack them.
So what's the easiest way to how do you get a hold of somebody? I mean, so let's say I'm going to relinquish procurement. I'm going to give a guy an order. I'm going to work with somebody. There's not like an Uber for order buyers. Yeah. So what's the easiest thing to do?
Talk to your neighbor or talk to some friends that are doing it. Talk to somebody that's in the business and that's successful in the business, and say, hey, who are you using? Who buys your stuff for you? Who procures your cattle for you? Or, I mean, go to the local markets, your local sale barns, just sit down around and watch and see a guy that you like what he's doing. I mean, like guys sitting there tending to business, buying cattle, not buying all of them, not just making the market, but he's tending to them. He's keeping cattle costing this, just doing a really, really good job. I mean, you can go find them guys that you trust and get a relationship with them. There were some people that my dad bought cattle for that I never seen, and he might have met once, but we bought cattle for him for 30 years. And some of them, my brother still does at the order buying company. He still buys cattle for them same people. We might have met them one time, but we send them cattle every year. And so it's just which again, we go back to that relationship and picking the right people to do business with. Somebody you can trust, somebody that'll do what they say and say what they do.
So tell me if I'm wrong, but what I think I hear you saying is it's probably more important. You're going to make your money possibly on the buy more than the sell.
Most
is that true?
Definitely. Yes, sir. Yep.
And I would agree with that 100%. Mm-hmm. So you've got to have the right strategy going in to procure the cattle, because if you do that wrong, you might have put yourself in a lost position for the whole trade.
Yeah, because you can sit there and buy a calf that most people think, man, he gives $10 $100 more than he's worth. But they ain't looking at the flesh. They ain't looking at the weigh up. The calf could gain 200 pounds in 2 days. I mean, just off the feel and off of just a little bit of tender loving care, but he's still stout enough to work. So there's different things like that you want to look at in your buyer to make sure that. And there's bigger order buying companies out there that do a really good job of procuring cattle for you. Just do a little research. I mean, just go out there and research on what you like, what kind of cattle you want to run, and get somebody you trust. I mean, we buy some cattle for guys in Oklahoma, and I sell some cattle for some guys up there that they buy cattle out of East, and they got a relationship with the guy. That guy's been buying their cattle for 25 years. I mean, that's what you want. You want to get that long-term relationship. Like you said on the last segment, you don't want the guy that wants to make home runs, hit home runs. You want a base hit every time, and that's what they do.
Yep. I agree 100%. Okay, so now we bought the cattle. We've bought them right, and we own them now. Mm-hmm. So the next step in the process is operations management, taking care of the animals. So we're talking about cattle coming off pasture and going into a feed yard. So whether that be a feed yard that you own yourself or you're going to put them in a feed yard, I'm thinking you guys would agree that the relationship with that feed yard and knowing are they good at putting gain on cattle? Can they do it cost effective? Is there going to be much death loss? What's the historics around death loss? What's their average cost per day of feeding the animals? Is that what you typically will look at?
I don't know about y'all, but I look at the manager first. Who is managing that yard? Get a relationship with who's the nutritionist, who tends to that part, who helps with the vet and that side of the deal. But the main thing is the manager. There are some really, really good feed yard managers out there, and a lot of them. But then there's some that you're like, oh, maybe we don't need to go back there. But that was to be the first thing I looked at if I was going to transition to the fed cattle deal, is who is managing that yard and who's in charge. How does he handle his crew? How does he, what do they do with their buy on their feeding and their corn, and how do they manage that risk and all those things. But the manager's a key thing in one of those deals, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that, and this is something that's always been very interesting to me because I've had the opportunity to be in, the vast majority of feed yards across the country. And there's lots of differences in feed yards. There's some that every fence post is painted. There's some that don't have any, and it doesn't really translate into the performance at the feed yard for sure. Some guys, I ask them a lot of times, how'd you figure out about this place, or where do you go? When you're talking about custom feed yards from that standpoint, and a lot of it's word of mouth. And I think that's in a lot of the different businesses. And so I think one big key piece of that is it goes back to what we talked about again and again, building a relationship with somebody you trust, because there's somebody that's grayer hair than you, and somebody that's a little bit longer in the tooth than you that's been through these different things. And all of it is trying to avoid some train wrecks, right? And so there's good ones. I'll tell you that most of the good feed yards are full. Because everybody sees that too, and so that's hard to get into some of them. But you got to try to find your way to line up into there. So whatever geographic location you're in. And so I think one big piece that I talk to my guys, and I've got some feed yard or some guys that are in South Texas to where they don't want to feed cattle in the Panhandle. They think it's better to go to Kansas and vice versa. And it just goes back to bias. And there's some guys that won't feed cattle outside of the state of Texas. There's some guys in the north that'll never feed cattle in the south, and a lot of that comes from history. But I think really just honing in and knowing your business and digging deep and trying to learn it. Again, I think it goes back to we can't kill the same set of cattle twice or feed the same set of cattle twice. But I have a tendency to lean on the network of people that you have in there, whether that's with your nutritionist that knowing you're as a banker, you get to see definitely under everybody's sheets, I guess you'd say.
Skirt, but sheet. You can pick one,
Yeah. So you get to see a lot of things that a lot of people don't get to see, and so you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. The only thing I guess I would add is when we're talking about feed yards, and everything you guys said is exactly 100% right. The other piece of that is making sure that feed yard, which the better ones always do, is have the right record keeping, that they can tell you what is my cost of gain, what, on a monthly basis, exactly, what do my cattle weigh in these lots?
What's he eating?
What are they gaining? What are they eating?
Yeah, what's the break-even projection going to be?
Exactly.
Yep,
you should be able to get all those reports, and if you can't, most likely that's going to cause you a problem down the road.
I would always laugh at my dad, that Colin, telling me he's got a set of cattle finished, and what does he want to do? He would say, well, what do you mean, what do we want to do? We got to sell them. They're finished. Sell them. Let's go. And I would always get tickled because his answer would be the same every time. What do you mean what I want to do? Sell this something.
Yeah, they're scared to pull the trigger and sell the cattle because they're scared because the last guy chewed them out because they sold the cattle. And your dad and those guys are thinking about, man, I need to get these cattle gone. And the feed yard manager might be thinking $100 versus like $14 a head or something.
And we're going to send more, so get them out of the way. Let's keep going. Let's keep rolling. So.
Well, that was a perfect segue into the next topic, which is marketing cattle. So it's just as important as I believe as buying the cattle. Mm-hmm. So now you got to determine the day that you're going to sell them. And you guys know all that better than I do, so let's talk about that a little bit. But as part of a marketing strategy, I wrap hedging strategy in there as well, because that is part of your marketing strategy. Mm-hmm. It's not just risk management. You're deciding when you pull the trigger on those hedges, basically you're making a sale, whether those cattle are still in the feed yard pen or not. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's every bit of this is equally as important. So let's expand a little bit on the marketing strategy and
Well,
Ty, what you see
would be
as pitfalls.
there'd be a little bit of different of marketing strategy on grazing cattle and wheat cattle and stuff, and then I would let Casey touch on the marketing strategy of the fat cattle and the fed cattle. I mean, because that's it's two different sets of the industry. So as far as the grass cattle and the wheat cattle, a lot of that's predictability of when you want to ship them is predicted by weather, and especially if you're doing wheat or grass. I mean, if you got a grow yard setting, it's a little different. However long you want to keep them, how big you want to get them, get with a program. Get it if you're doing a grow yard deal, stick with the program. Get a reputation going. Okay, this guy keeps his cattle 75, 80 days. He makes them weigh 750 to 775. He's going to have a good set of cattle ever 75 to 80 days, or 5 loads or 10 loads, whatever your deal is. But get with a program, and it don't matter whether you're selling them to an individual or you're selling them on a video sale or how you're marketing them. But you got to build your reputation. When you build that reputation up, the marketing of the cattle gets easier, because everybody wants them because they know how they're going to perform. Well, let's take that back. Everybody either wants them because they know what they're going to do, or they don't want them. So if they don't want them, then you need to change something. You're going to have to adapt. So if you see yourself struggling of getting your cattle sold, maybe you need to reflect and say, okay, what do I need to do different? Maybe ask them guys, why didn't they like them? Why aren't they not coming back? Did they feed bad? So do I need to lighten up my ration where I'm not getting them so fat? Do I need to keep a little bit more condition on them where they're performing at the next level? Those are things that you need to ask yourself if you're having trouble marketing them. The grass cattle and the wheat cattle, it all depends on, like I said, the weather. But you can, a lot of the grass cattle come off the wheat deal. If you got to come off your early graze, I mean, your harvest wheat, you got to come off in March, April, and then your graze out April, May. So just form you a strategy. We like to stay ahead of the market because it's here lately. It's been the closer you get to your delivery date, the tighter it is, the tighter the pen space is. So, I'm kind of telling my guys to try to stay 45, 60 days out on some of their out deliveries. There's some guys that they can't do that. They got to get them up. They got to get them in. They got to sort them. They got to know what they got. So that's a 2-week sale. But the rest of them guys they've run the same kind of set of cattle for the last several years. They know they kind of can predict what they're going to do. They can predict their out date if they get the weather right. So you got to stay. If you'll stay out a little bit, this market it's a little bit easier to sell them and market them. And if you feel like you got more outs because people aren't spacing it so tight. So that's what we've been feeling here lately, anyways, on selling those cattle.
Yeah, so I'm going to say on a flexibility standpoint, let's stay on wheat pasture cattle and grass cattle. And let's really specifically talk about wheat pasture cattle. So we generally buy those things when the wheat starts popping up, right? Because we don't know if we're going to get some rains unless you're irrigated, obviously. But in dryland wheat country, you get the cattle bought. You get those cattle bought in the fall. We start getting the wheat popped up. We kick those things out. Lord willing, the rains come and the wheat comes and everything's great. Like we got a year like this where you got tons of wheat. You got lots of flexibility. Yeah. What I try to do with most guys, and let's talk about, you have 2 periods where you're going to market them cattle, March and May, right? Whether you're going to, pull them cattle off early and harvest the wheat, or you're going to graze the cattle out and graze the wheat out. You got some flexibility there. Let's say we're talking about a graze out wheat pasture deal where you're going to have some cattle that are coming off in May. Where I start to combine, and this goes back to whatever size you're at. Let's say I'm straight wheat pasture guy. This LRP has been tremendous for that. What it's been tremendous for is the vast majority of the years, the longer you wait to sell the cattle, the worse the market is. Now, this year likely is going to shape up a little bit different than that. It feels like as we turn the calendar, the market just goes higher. So, but most years aren't like that. So seasonally, the market puts a peak in kind of in the January time period, and then it seasonally breaks going into the May time period. So a lot of times what I recommend to guys, Ty, is like try to forward sell them wheat pasture cattle, for the graze out time period if it looks like the wheat's there, and then buy an LRP policy that we buy the LRP policy first that expires in that March, April, May time period, whatever fits you, whatever price period you like there, and then we start to look for an opportunity to sell those cattle as the market kind of peaks out. If the market stays low, we drag our feet because the security of that LRP policy allows us that confidence to continue to do that. If the market's at a raging high like we are right now, maybe you go ahead and sell the cattle and take the profit where you're at. and then you still have that LRP policy in place. And so I think from a wheat pasture grass deal, that gives us the LRP allows us to have that security, and then have the flexibility to sell the cattle whenever it works.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Another one of them awkward silences again.
So let's talk about marketing fat cattle. Okay, so we're going to talk about marketing fat cattle for a second because we kind of combine both of these things together. So marketing fat cattle, I think that goes back to the feed yard and the relationship that feed yard has. So you might have some feed yards that are just going to be a straight cash seller, and there's fewer and fewer of those, as we've all been aware of over time. But there's a handful of those guys in all areas that straight up sell cash cattle. So if you're a producer that loves that side of it and you want the cash market, you find a feed yard that does there. You have a tendency to have more say in what you want for your cattle from that standpoint. But obviously, sometimes that could run to your detriment as well, like you talked about with your dad wanting to, just go ahead and sell the cattle. They got other feed yards that are what I would refer to as our formula, and those formulas are different at different feed yards. They're all vastly different. But by and large, they all do the same thing, and they reward cattle that are better from a cutability standpoint and a yield standpoint. And the ones that grade more, they reward those. And then, so if you got cattle that are really, really good, and you've gone back and bought really high-end front-end cattle from a conventional standpoint, you might want to grid those so that you get the reward for that. So different feed yards there, and again, you can ask all the questions and figure out where to go and who has what grids, and different packers have different scenarios based on geographic locations. From a hedging standpoint, and so this is where we'll probably dig a little bit deeper on this. We start to get a little bit more complex, and really, what I try to do is depending on the size of the producer, the exposure that the producer has. We got varying different risk management strategies that are in place. What I always recommend is if a guy's got a couple of pens of cattle, or like, let's say it's less than 1,000 head of cattle, I'm probably going to push those guys predominantly to use a forward contract to where they don't have a margin call. They can go to the packer through their feed yard and just forward sell those cattle on a basis trade and go ahead and price them, and then they're just locked in. As we start to get bigger, 500, 1,000, 2,500 head of cattle, we start to get into more in-depth risk management plans where we're using a comprehensive approach, using LRP, livestock risk protection insurance. The thing that's synonymous with that or the same or very similar is a put option. We start to get into where we have brokerage accounts, managing margin calls and things like that with options and futures. We start to take a very hybrid approach between LRP, which is the livestock risk protection insurance, and options, short calls, futures, and different things like that. And so I'm not going to bore people with what all those things are because we could get down a big time rabbit hole. But taking a very, very, a level-headed approach based on seasonality, timing, market prices, and trying to achieve the goals that you have there. So what I would say is find whoever you have comfort in. It doesn't have to be me, or it could be whoever you're comfortable with, who you can sit down and have a really deep, in-depth conversation with, who you like, generally speaking, and who's willing to sit down and have that conversation with you on what fits your specific needs. But you mentioned, as far as the banking side of things go, how managing margin calls and different things like that from a sector. We might get into that here in a minute, but just making sure you have all of those things in place and somebody can help you understand that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you said is there, Casey, is the key. Is the more complicated the hedging strategy is, the more you need to rely on the relationship you have with your broker and really having that person explain it, manage it. Some of these hedging strategies are fairly simple, I would say. Some of them are very, very complex. And if you're trying to do it yourself because, you watching CNBC that day and heard some crazy strategy, next thing you know, you might not be hedged and you thought you were. So I think certainly as it gets more complicated, those strategies, you've got to rely on a professional. That's what I would say on that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of times where I'll get on, and I tell my guys all the time, like, hey, get your banker on the phone. Let's talk about this, because the last thing that I ever want to get is to a position where we have a plan, everything's great, we have a strategy, it's all great, market goes one way or the other, and then we have to do something different because of constraints. Right. And so I mean, I'm gonna tell you this: like, get your banker on the phone with your broker, get your banker on your phone with your feed yard, making sure that all of those things are good, because you could have a plan in place and then things go awry.
Exactly. So the first 3 steps are really the exciting part of the cattle business, right? That's what every producer likes. Loves to buy cattle, loves to raise cattle, loves to sell cattle. That's what we've talked about so far. Well, these last 2 steps are what everybody hates the worst. And I don't even like it, and I'm a banker. That's record keeping and financial reporting, which kind of go hand in hand, but it really is 2 separate steps. The reason I break them up is because the record keeping part is really internal. You're, as a business owner and an operator, are trying to determine what records do I need to manage my business, and what records do I need to show my accountant, show my banker, et cetera, so that they can do the financial reporting. And when we're talking about cattle feeding, there's lots of different ways you could do it. You could do it on a notebook paper. You could buy software. You could hire a bookkeeper to do it for you. So there's many, many ways to do it. I think the only point I want to make there is you really need to think about where are you trying to take your business long term. And if you're going to scale it up, then put yourself in a position as you're making these decisions that whatever record keeping that you have, it's going to work on your business for, let's say, the next 5 years. So if you don't really intend to grow, maybe you don't need a sophisticated record keeping strategy. But if you plan to grow from, say, 200 head to, 2,000 head or 5,000 head or 10,000 head or whatever, you probably want to make sure you've got the right systems in place early on so that you can scale your business and you don't have to worry about that, a year or 2 down the road, because it's costly to put those in place, and there's also a lot of training involved. So I just think that that's very important, because everybody's going to be asking you for these records, and they need to be accurate. They need to be timely, especially when we're talking about a banking relationship. So we talked about borrowing-based reports when we met last time, and those reports really are not that hard to do, but they need to be accurate. And it's important for you to know, well, what is my cost of gain? What am I spending to feed these pasture cattle or whatever on their cost of gain? That's a little different than cattle in the feed yard. So I make that point to say, make sure whatever you're doing is accurate and you can do it timely.
And you said it, I think there's several of those good record keeping marketing tools out there that they've developed them and they're really good at what they do. And if those guys ever want to advertise or something with us, we would love for you to advertise on the podcast. So just look up Katie. But those record keeping deals are fabulous to use. I mean, just to be able to put your inputs in and they have it all lined out for you. They got good training. They can train you on what to do. They can train you how to put your inputs in there, and then it tells you how to do it all. I mean, and then it figures it all for you. And that's something that your banker and your accountant would love for you, especially if you're scaling your program up, going from 500 to 1,000 or 1,000 to 2,000 or whatever. You have to have some kind of record keeping system. And you're right that if you want to research those and go find you a good one, they're out there.
Yep.
I've got some customers one in particular, that guy spends 2 or 3 hours at night going through his records and making sure it's there. And he does everything pen and paper. And this is a fairly young guy. Not many people have the opportunity or the time to do that, especially if you're wanting to grow and push and things like that. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff's automated, and in the days of AI, there's probably even it's easier than what it is. And so if you got any kind of personality type like I do, you need a system. I mean, for sure. That way you could just easily see it and kind of know where you're sitting right there, so like a reporting system.
Yeah. And then, so the last piece of that is the financial reporting piece. So it's really, that's likely going to be your accountant, because most, and I will say, we talked about, this is a younger operator we're talking about probably that's trying to grow their business, is where we started this. And we haven't said one word about having to go out and hire somebody yet. So I'm not saying you need to go hire 5 people to do these things. You may be able to do them all yourself if you have the right relationships with a commodity broker, with a cattle buyer, with a banker. So, and you have the right software. So we haven't talked at all about having to hire somebody till now, which would probably be an accountant. Mm-hmm. And the reason that you think, well, that's pretty simple, but it's not really. And the reason is because you probably need, especially if you're going to grow your cattle business, somebody that's very familiar with not only the cattle industry, but cattle feeding in general. because that's a cattle feeder, somebody that's turning cattle a lot. That's a lot different than somebody that just has a cow-calf operation and maybe they sell calves once a year.
Yeah.
And you have to have the right accountant that's experienced in that type of work. So what I'd recommend there is, talk to your friends and neighbors, find out who's good at what they do, and try to find somebody that can meet deadlines. And I can tell you that's getting harder and harder every day. These accountants seem extremely busy. I think there's only so many really highly qualified ones that are specialized, and it gets more and more difficult to get the reporting on time. And that's not usually the producer's fault, and I'm not saying it's really the accountant's fault. It's just a reality. So do a little bit of research, make sure you find the right one, and it'll pay you dividends in the end.
I mean, do you have some guys that you work with? I mean, you don't have to say them on here, but I mean if somebody came to you, John, and said, "Hey, look, I'm frustrated. I'm pulling my hair out. I've got an accountant that doesn't know anything about cattle." I mean, I hear that quite a bit. Or is there a list of them out there that we can find? Is there somebody that you could? I mean, if I came to you in confidence, you could recommend them.
Yeah, I don't know of a list, so to speak, but absolutely, we'd be willing to give some names. And what I would say is, those are about as good as what you pay for them, and I'm not charging you anything. So do your own research, because a lot of that's also about relationship, and you need to know if they're qualified, but you also need to say, can I get along with this person? Because you're going to have some very intimate conversations, and you need to make sure that you're comfortable with the person and you like talking to them, because they're going to know everything about you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've kind of dove into most of it. Is there anything else y'all kind of want to cover? Is there anything else you want to talk about, John?
The only thing I would say is, in each of these steps, you can create yourself advantages over your competition. So your competition really is the next guy feeding the cattle, right? And you can give yourself pennies on every head in each one of these steps. So if you do a good job in all of them, you can give yourself a significant advantage as you're feeding these animals through the cycle. So that's what I would say is, look at them all and see how you can make yourself more gain without any risk.
Yeah, you're talking about like just kind of creating a plan and having the ability to kind of step through that thing versus just rolling in there and gambling in the cattle market or buying a set of cattle and hoping this thing works. And I mean, and one thing I would tell people all the time is like, hope's not a strategy. I mean, when you hear that all the time, I hope the cattle market goes up. I hope it's good. I hope it rains. There's really no strategy in terms of that, but those are not controllable. But controllable is knowing who's buying your cattle for you and making sure they're not cheating. Having the right, partner whenever you go to grass or go to a wheat pasture, and making sure your cattle are there whenever they go to ship. Going to the feed yard and making sure that those guys are going to care for them in the right way. And there's lots of good feed yards. I mean, I've got a list a mile long. And then the bad ones usually don't last around very long. They end up getting sold or shut down or whatever. But and then the part that I personally that I think is vastly as important as that financial reporting part of it. So you know where you're at. And then again, whenever you get to a point where you've got, need to buy cattle or you need to buy more, the market's always going to go up over time, right?
Yep.
From the time that we were little kids until now, you're going to have some chop in between there. My assumption is if some guy's walking in with a wadded up piece of paper and he says that's his borrowing base, you're probably going to not necessarily get all excited about that. But if somebody walks in there with a laptop and has these rough, really good financial reporting tools, that you guys are going to listen, and you're going to probably be more excited about lending money to those guys, compressing their margins higher, their line, their note higher, and working with them and driving higher.
Absolutely. I could have said that better myself.
So if I walked in on my big cheat tablet with writing on it, you're probably not going to.
I
must have been why Jason redid it all the other day. We had to deal with some banks the other day, and I had it on Big Chief tablet. He said, "Give me that."
I imagine some people's financial statements are written on the back of a Copenhagen.
I'm a little bit old. I'm a little bit old school too, so I don't really mind Big Chief tablets necessarily, but they got to have the right stuff on them.
Yeah.
Well, once again, John, thank you, John Sloan with AgTexas. If you got any questions for John, feel free to call him. It's 806-703-3884. Give him a call. He'd love to answer any questions. Like you said, this is informative. We want to be more educational. That's the whole purpose of these podcasts. Well, sometimes we'll get on here and have a little fun. We might do that on the next one or two, but we want to be informative, and we want to educate the people that are wanting to grow and wanting to get bigger. Something that we could probably have went and found it when we was trying to get bigger, but just wasn't readily out there, readily available for us. But so
yeah, and if you guys have any questions whatsoever, I mean, you feel free to message Ty or get a hold of Ty or myself, or I mean, we got a whole team of people that can help you.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't going to say this a second ago, but if you guys are looking for somebody to buy cattle, he can probably find somebody to help you.
Oh yeah.
Or at least kind of get you through those pitfalls. I mean, this industry is a family. This industry is a network. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's easier ways or easier routes to do this. The vast majority of guys in the cattle business they're a little bit, I'd say, reclusive sometimes and don't want to step out there and ask somebody. There's all kinds of different forms of communication that you can reach out to us on. He
was saying something earlier about advice, and I think you said something about being able to call somebody and ask them a question that's been there, done that. They're long in the tooth, gray haired. They've been through it all. I've been fortunate in my life that my dad had put me in a lot of positions to meet a lot of different people and a lot of very intelligent people. And there's a couple of them guys I can still pick up the phone and call and say, look, I'm beating my head against the wall on this deal. What do I do? And they'll walk through it with us. And you need to have those. You need to find those relationships.
Yeah, they won't give you the answer.
They're not going to give you the answer. They're just going to say,
nobody has the answer.
Yeah, they don't. But they will say, well, have you tried this? You're going to do this. Might look at this. Might do this. But they'll walk through it with you. But you got to have those relationships for them guys to do it. They're not just going to talk to no stranger. But that's what we're talking about. Yep. If you're young in this game and you're wanting to get better and bigger in this industry, build those relationships. Reach out and talk to those guys. Don't be afraid to sit down and just visit with one of them guys. Go through the sale barns, sit down and chat with them. Go to these video sales, pick their brains, or pick up the phone, call somebody.
Well, I'll be at the live sale tomorrow. So if anybody's got any questions, this is all about education for me. We're not trying to sell you anything.
Yeah.
We just want to be here for you if you got any questions. So,
and the best part about it is, just like the title says, we live it. We all in the business. We're all in the industry. We do it on a daily basis. So we love what we do.
Some days we love it more than others.
True. So, but it's a great industry to be in. And thanks again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the insight on what you do, what you guys do. Is me and Casey have been talking about this for a month or so now, about how all this ties together in the banking world, and trying to find somebody that would come on here and be open, and we might have shot some pretty tough questions your way, but not be afraid to answer them. So we appreciate that. Not try to sell something. We're just trying to educate. So once again, thank you guys for watching the We Live It podcast for Live Ag. If you got any questions, visit live-ag.com, or look up Katie. Give her shoot her an email if you want to advertise with us. Don't forget, once again, hit subscribe when you watch it. So now I'm getting brownie points with Katie. So thank you guys, and remember, we live it and we love you.